Welcome back, Mike.
Hey, thanks. It's been a while. Well, actually, by the time this episode releases, it'll probably be back on schedule. But
Sure you want to say that publicly?
I do. I'm committed to making this thing work. For one thing, we launched in the last episode the premium membership for the club, and we've had a handful of people who have signed up for that already. And as we're recording this, it's not even been 24 hours since we launched that, which I know you mentioned before. People signed up quicker than you thought they would. So I just want to give a shout out to everybody who did sign up. Thank you so much for supporting the show. And for people who might be interested in that sort of thing, we're still adding stuff to the membership, but kind of what we've landed on for now is that there's going to be a special premium section of the Bookworm Club, which is going to have a bunch of extra stuff in it. Right now, it's got all of my book notes. So the entire archive of all of the mind maps that I've been making. I think I uploaded like 42 of them yesterday.
It's a lot.
It
I
is
was
a
looking
lot.
through all these, like, holy buckets, there's a lot in here.
There is a lot there. So if you want to go back and look through all of those, and it's not just the ones that we've covered for the episodes, it's all of my Gap Book stuff, that anything basically that has a lot of information in it, I uploaded. Some of them I didn't really take a whole lot of notes, so I didn't upload those, but there's a ton of stuff in there. I also created a 4K desktop wallpaper, which has the Bookworm logo on top of like this reverse radial gradient sort of a thing. It's pretty subtle, and I think it looks pretty sweet. I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
I'm kind of a wallpaper snob of sorts. So when I saw this, like, oh, Mike, you're doing a wallpaper, but I hadn't seen it yet. And I'm one that typically has really dark colored backgrounds. So when I did see this, like, oh, I can actually get behind that one. Like, I'm picky with this sort of thing. So I did use it. So I'm using it now.
Yeah, it's pretty subtle. I think it looks pretty good. Obviously, I'm biased,
Right.
and I'm not a graphic designer. By the way, inside baseball, the easiest way to make a radial gradient like that looks good is in Keynote.
Oh, interesting.
So literally what I did is I created a Keynote slide, which was 4K by 2K, and then exported it as an image.
Well done, Mike.
But yeah, it looks pretty cool. So
I like
there's
it.
that. What else did we put in there? Oh, and then there's like the little badge, the badge on the Bookworm Club. So you get the same little Bookworm logo thing that you and I have as co-hosts when you are in the club, as kind of like a little status symbol sort of a thing. And the other thing, which is not to be overstated, our undying gratitude is how I labeled it on the sales page. But really, like, I'm blown away that people are willing to contribute a couple bucks a month to help us keep the show going. Because there were a lot of people. I went through some things. You went through some things. We had to reschedule before I went on vacation. I went on vacation. I got sick when I got back. So there were a handful of people who were saying, basically, is the show still live? I don't want to see Bookworm go. And that kind of accelerated the whole, well, how do we make this thing sustainable?
Right.
Because we really were in the middle of, okay, we got to just put out, or I was anyways, I got to just put out the fires and do the urgent things. So how does this fit in there? And for people to put money behind the show really means a lot. I'm speaking for you, Joe, but it really means a lot to both you and I. And so I want to say thank you to everyone who did that. Thank you to everybody else who listens to the show and left a review and all the other ways that you can support the show. But a special thanks to the people who are willing to chip in a little bit every month to help keep the show going. That really means a lot.
Yeah, I continue to be, amazed by the people who, have conversations with us on the club and that do go through the process of leaving reviews. These are things that I'm not great at, so it always just completely surprises me whenever people start to engage with that sort of thing, and then support us financially even on top of that. So just blown away by the generosity there. Thank you to the listeners who continue to do that and continue to send in things like recommendations and interact with us on the club and on social media. Like, it's kind of fun. It's kind of cool to see the connection that happens there. So it's a lot of fun for me to make those connections with the folks who listen on the other side of the microphone. You and I get to talk on this side of the mic all the time, but it's very different coming from folks on the other end of all the cords and cables and stuff. So thank you, team.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you also to everybody who has bought a Bookworm shirt. We haven't mentioned this in a little while, but there is a Cotton Bureau campaign, which is basically eternally open. So if you want to buy a Bookworm shirt, you can do that. There's t-shirts and sweatshirts there. That doesn't make us a whole lot of money, but we do get a couple of bucks every time we get a sale through there. And the shirts are really nice. I've lost track of the number of Cotton Bureau shirts that I've bought over the years. I just bought one for drafts.
Oh, nice.
Which is super comfy, and I love drafts. I use it every single day. So happy to support Greg Pierce, the developer. And so if you wanted to get your own Bookworm shirt, you can do that. We'll have a link in the show notes. But enough of this self-promotion stuff. Let's get into our action items here.
Yeah, and I'm just quick note, I'm wearing my sweatshirt right now.
Of course you are.
Yep, love this thing. It's because we're recording on a Saturday, and I don't dress up on Saturdays. So here we are. That said, okay, follow up. I am wrapping up my digital declutter today, Mike.
Yeah?
And so tomorrow is Sunday. I don't know how this is going to go, because tomorrow is kind of my first day, like, to be done with that and slowly start introducing things. But it's Sunday. I normally don't do a whole lot with computers and stuff on Sunday, so I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just going to make it a 31 day just to make sure it's like Monday before I come back into things.
Overachiever.
It's mostly because I don't want to just, goof off on my phone whenever I'm coming back from, like, when it's after church on Sunday. Like, I just don't want to do that. So,
yep.
Anyway, it's been an interesting process. It's been fascinating to see the number of times when I would have just been spending time on my phone or doing things on my computer that I probably shouldn't be, goofing off and doing research on things that don't matter. Like, things like that I've been cutting out quite a bit. But kind of the other half of this, so one of my other action items was to list out leisure activities. And I'll drop these into the club. But I haven't found myself reaching outside of that, but I've been, pulling things from that list of things that I enjoy doing to try to fill some of the time that I'm now regaining, and I didn't realize I was regaining. It's been a very enlightening process. I know you don't like the idea of a digital declutter, but I think it would be very helpful for you. So, yeah. As somebody who works in the tech industry, and heavily so, this was an enlightening experience.
Nice. Well, I have a little bit of an update here. I've not done a digital declutter, but since we spoke last, David and I interviewed Shahid Ahmed for the Focused podcast because I was actually on vacation, and in the Relay Slack channel, Shahid had mentioned that he read Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport in the general channel, so we started chatting, and I was like, so did you do the digital declutter thing? Because Shahid is a video game developer.
Right.
And he said, yeah, I did it, and I love it, and I went from an iPhone 10 to an iPhone SE, and he eliminated all sorts of crazy stuff off of his phone from it.
Wow.
We recorded that episode. It'll be live by the time this publishes, so we'll put a link in the show notes. It was a really cool conversation, and he's moving the needle for me. He basically he used a definition that I really liked of infinity pools as opposed to like the endless feeds.
Yeah.
Because he called out that like he needed to order some screwdrivers to fix something. And so he went into the Amazon app, and then he realized that he just kept looking at stuff on Amazon. He's like, oh, that's an infinity pool. Delete.
Yeah.
Those things that you don't typically think of. And so I have my own action items that we'll get to here in a second. I have not done the digital declutter, but Shahid made a very compelling case for it.
I think you should do it. Just saying.
We'll see.
It's helpful. So yes, I am wrapping that up soon. Next time we record, I may have some interesting feedback on that. The only other action item I had here was to experiment with the concept of building a plugin for discourse forums that removes the functionality to like posts in their entirety. Decided against this, mostly because I have no market for it.
Yeah.
And it would be a fairly significant amount of work.
Sure.
So, research complete. Answer is no. If someone wants to sponsor it, it'll become a yes. However, Joe will not be sponsoring that out of his own foot. So, here we are.
All right. So I've got 4 different action items. The first one is to list the benefits that I get from the platforms that I use. And then the second one, kind of related to that, is to delete all social media off of my phone. So I did this, and making the list really was the thing that got me to keep Instagram off of my phone. Instagram is one of those things that, like, I'll delete it and then I'll end up reinstalling it because I like Instagram. It seems friendlier than a lot of the other social media platforms that are out there.
Yeah.
But it's also iPhone or mobile only. So you can't run it except in a stupid looking blown up window on your iPad. So that's the thing that's always made it not be gone for long on my phone before. But recognizing that I really don't get a whole lot out of Instagram, that's one of those infinity pools or endless feeds that typically I just end up looking at stuff instead of posting things.
Right.
So yeah, Twitter's off of my phone, Instagram's off of my phone. I still check Twitter on my iPad, but having it on my iPad instead of my phone has kind of transformed the way that I use it. So instead of pulling it out to check it periodically, I basically end up looking at it once or twice a day. And it does make things a little bit more inconvenient, which is why I think I forgot, as I'm talking right now, I realize I forgot to tweet that I published the episode yesterday because I normally would just pull out my phone and do that. You know? And I don't have that anymore. So I kind of have to create new muscle memory there. I have to get my iPad out of my bag if I'm going to do that. But
sure.
But yeah, it's been positive. Miniature version of all the digital declutter benefits that you were mentioning, I'm sure. And you're saying, like, just go all in with this because it's this times, whatever, right, exponential. But
yep, because that's just one small aspect of it.
Yep. Good start, though.
Yep.
I also have one here, never click like again. I did this once, and as soon as I did it, I'm like, dang it. I said
so
I would
it's even muscle
this.
memory.
Yeah. But I think the action item has served its purpose where it's broken the habit of doing that sort of thing. So literally I have done it once. And when I did it, like I said, I had that immediate reaction like, I said I was never going to do this again. And then I just left it. I didn't unlike it, whatever.
Yeah. So I guess my question there is, so you're not liking things. Have you replaced that, like the sentiment intention there, like what you intended to say by liking something? Did you replace it with like a post in reply to a phone call? Like, did you replace it with something, or did you just skip by that altogether?
Well, not necessarily. I mentioned in the last episode that I do that occasionally with stuff that friends will post, but I found that the like specifically for me was triggered by Instagram. So by removing Instagram, I have basically removed the temptation to hit the like button.
Sure. Interesting.
I don't know. Like, it seems more natural to say, yeah, I like this picture rather than to leave a comment on Instagram. Instagram comments, I'm sure it works the same way as every other social media platform, whatever, but it just feels weird when you leave them. Like, I'm not sure if this person's actually going to see this.
Yeah.
So that was something that I recognized that's just been ingrained in me, that I hit the little heart icon, and now that Instagram's not there, I don't really do that. So that was, by the way, the one time that I hit it was before Instagram was permanently gone off my phone. And that's kind of the thing that got me to go along with it for sure. Is like, okay, seriously, this is the thing that's causing this other action item to fail. This has got to go.
It's interesting how probably all of your action items here can all be summed up to some degree with Instagram. Like, fighting Instagram. Interesting.
Well, not the last one. The last one was figure out my own low information diet, as Cal put it. And I really like this idea. I have not stumbled onto what exactly this looks like for me yet. I was hoping that Apple News Plus would fit this bill because I would look at the Wall Street Journal and probably nothing else, except that they don't give you the full Wall Street Journal, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that they're trying to get you to look at instead.
Right.
Just the way that it's laid out, I didn't like it at all. You can't just go read like today's episode of the Wall Street Journal. It presents all the information in that endless feed type format, which completely made it a non-starter for me. even though they've got a whole bunch of other magazines. As I was looking through them, I'm like, well, this one looks cool. That one I would read occasionally. And then I'm like, wait a minute. This isn't stuff that I'm reading right now. I had no desire to read this stuff before I looked at it. Like, why would I create more information for myself to consume? So I signed up for they give you like a free month after the to check it out. I signed up for it, realized the Wall Street Journal wasn't there in any navigatable form, and instantly unsubscribed.
Yeah.
So the same day. And I know that once you unsubscribe, your access is turned off. So people will say, oh, just set a task or an alarm, whatever, to unsubscribe before the month is up. And I was like, nope, not even going to go there.
Right.
Just going to get rid of this. So I still had to figure out what my low information diet looks like. Although when you just have RSS to stay on top of, at least the way my RSS is set up, it's a lot more manageable than trying to keep up with that, plus the Twitter feeds, plus Instagram, and all the other things.
Keep it simple, yeah.
Yep. So I still want to go through and cull a bunch of things out, curate it, because I do see a lot of like repeat stories and stuff like that. I recognize because I follow, John Gruber and Federico Viticci and Stephen Hackett and Jason Snell and all these people who are basically saying the same thing. And then when somebody has a really good article, they all link to it anyways.
Right. Right.
So that is the next step that I haven't finished yet.
Fair enough. Well, good luck with that. I don't think the news thing is going to cut it. I don't have any interest in that because there's so much stuff that's in that I don't want to read or won't read. So yeah, not worth it. But I also, confession, I get the paper version of the Wall Street Journal. So that's where I get most of mine.
Well, maybe that's what I got to do, but it's so expensive.
Yeah.
I've been so close to subscribing a bunch of times because I do like the information that is in the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
And if I were to just read that every day, I feel like I would be very well informed with the things that I want to keep up with and wouldn't necessarily be made sad by all the political commentary.
Right.
So it's kind of the ideal source for these things, but it is so dang expensive, even for just the digital one. So when Apple News was launched, and $10 a month, and it includes the Wall Street Journal, I'm like, I got to check this out because that's like half of just the discounted digital subscription.
Right. But you're still talking about $120 a year.
Yeah. Well, I think the digital subscription was like $38 a month or something after the initial period goes off.
Sure.
$38 a month for digital. Give me a break. I know we talked about that in one of those books that we covered. Which one was that? Was that the Predictably Irrational? They used that example from The Economist.
Yep. Well, yes, all of these action items come from Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, and a couple of books that Cal talked about in Digital Minimalism, one of which, the one you just mentioned, Predictably Irrational, by Dan O'Reilly. But Dan O'Reilly actually wrote a quote for the one we're going to go through today, Drunk Tank Pink, which was also mentioned in Digital Minimalism. Dan O'Reilly wrote, "Alter's book will change the way you look at our world." I think that's a fair assessment, having read this. So Drunk Tank Pink by Adam Alter, and he's also the author of another book called Irresistible. But the tagline on this one today is Drunk Tank Pink and other unexpected forces that shape how we think, feel, and behave. And like Mike and I were talking a little bit before we hit the little red record button, and like this might be an interesting book to go through because it's super fast paced. There's a lot of little tiny stories that are just one after another, tons and tons of research. Mainly the reason I picked it was because I thought the title was really cool. Because like Drunk Tank Pink, what? That is such a weird title. As soon as I read the story about it, it made perfect sense. But it was just fascinating to me. But this book basically goes through a lot of different aspects of our daily life, and then tries to explain, and successfully so in many cases, tries to explain why they impact us the way they do. Why does the color pink affect us a certain way? Why does this color do this? Why does this symbol do that? When you're around other people, this happens. Like just a lot of that stuff. I just found it very fascinating. So I think this will be an interesting book to go through today.
Yeah. Side note, you mentioned that Dan O'Reilly had the quote on the the back, and I noticed that when I was about halfway through this book, and I was like, oh, that explains a lot.
Yep.
So we'll get into the specifics here, but I guess spoiler alert, just like Predictably Irrational, I believe, neither of us have action items associated with this.
Yes.
This is a lot of information and kind of bugs me from a bookworm perspective because it's like, okay, I know this stuff, but what's the takeaway here? Like, how am I going to do anything with what I just invested with reading this? And there probably is some stuff that's going to stick with me and I'll recognize like, hey, this is happening and shaping my interpretation of these events that are happening in front of me. But I am not optimistic that this is going to have any sort of long-term effect on the way that I live my life.
Yeah.
Which is kind of frustrating, to be honest. But
yeah, this is one of these books that it's not really geared towards driving you to do something about it. Not necessarily. He does call something out in like the last paragraph of the book, or maybe was it the last sentence, that I kind of wish he had, expanded on a little bit more. Let me see if I can get this. Yeah, right here. So let me just read this last little bit to you. So no matter where you go, Drunk Tank Pink and other cues will follow. And having read this book, you'll be in a much better place to identify them, recognize how they'll affect you, and harness to overcome them to maximize your health, wisdom, wealth, and well-being. And to me, he's basically calling out, it's like, you're going to identify these things because of this, but he doesn't even tell you what to do about it, which I'm not sure was his intent.
No.
So I have a hard time faulting him for that. I think that has to do more with a personality or a preference for the intent of the book, which his did not align with what we normally request of authors. So with that, like, I have a hard time faulting him for it, but at the same time, I'm with you. It's like, yes, I don't have any action items here, but I have a lot of things that I'm aware of that I normally wasn't or previously wasn't aware of. So in that regard, I feel like I have a lot. But as far as what do you physically do with it, maybe talk to people about it? I don't know. That's about it.
Right. Well, the other piece to this, and we'll get into some of the specifics here, but a lot of this stuff I feel like was fairly common sense. Like, look people in the eyes. Sort of a thing. And that stuff, it's kind of like, well, okay, do I really need a reminder for that sort of thing? The rest of the stuff that was new, I feel like there's no way I'm going to recall that in a moment's notice when I need it, other than if I were to go back and look through this outline. The most powerful story, I thought, in the whole book was that first section about Drunk Tank Pink. And then from there, I feel like it went downhill.
Yeah. So,
but Drunk Tank Pink is a really cool idea. Let's start there. You want to explain this?
So Drunk Tank Pink, this is a part of, what was it, the prologue?
I think so.
I think it was. Yeah. So there was an experiment done. When was this? It was a paper that came out in 1979. And the author of that paper was Professor Alexander Schoss. And it was a simple experiment that they did. There was about 150 men that were a part of it. They took two large pieces of colored cardboard in a lab, and they had people come in, and they had some men stare at these two colors of cardboard. One was blue. It's like a deep blue color. The other, it was bright pink. So for half of the men in the experiment, they stared at the blue color. For the other half, they stared at the pink color. After a minute of this, the researcher asked the men to put their arms like straight out in front of them, and he would put pressure down on their arms just to see, what kind of strength they had in that. So once he had done that, and then after they'd recovered their strength, the researcher wrote some things down and then repeated the experiment with them staring at the other color of the cardboard. The part that was interesting was that those, after having stared at the pink cardboard, it didn't matter if you did it first or second, but they had less strength after staring at the pink as opposed to the blue. It was just weird to me. Like, all you're doing is looking at a color. Why does your strength change? Because you're looking at a color. But this is apparently something that was repeatable. They did do it at a second experiment, only they used some more accurate ways of measuring the strength and confirmed it. So, and this ended up being a thing that some different organizations read the study, decided to do some larger scale experiments, and started to paint like prison cells pink. You know, that's where some of the drunk tank pink name comes from. Throwing somebody in the drunk tank. Well, paint the drunk tank pink, and it settles people down. And so much so that some police stations, when they did this, were reporting that incidents of violence were ceasing altogether or dropping very significantly. All because they painted the cell pink. Thus, drunk tank pink. I thought this was a fascinating story.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me stop. I'm like, whoa, hold up. What's going on here? So it's kind of an interesting one.
Yeah. Like I said, this is the strongest story in the entire book, in my opinion. But just to add a few more details to what you were sharing, one of the things that they did after the initial study, there were two officers at the U.S. Naval Correctional Center in Seattle. I believe they were Gene Baker and Ron Miller, and they painted one of their cells this pink color, and that pacified new inmates where no violent incidents had occurred in the 7-month trial period. You kind of alluded to that, and then from there, the smaller jails, they started throwing the violent drunks in these pink painted cells, and that's where they got the name Drunk Tank Pink. But they saw the application of this in a lot of other places as well. They mentioned that United Way employees would receive 2 to 3 times the amount of donations when they wore pink. And there were a couple of universities, University of Colorado and the University of Iowa, that painted their visitor locker rooms pink to try to pacify their opponents until the conferences said, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, I thought that was genius.
Yeah.
That is brilliant.
As soon as I heard that story, I'm like, oh man, that makes that makes so much sense. I can't believe everybody didn't try to do that.
Right.
But yeah, this story was awesome. And then from there, like this one, I guess I've been trying to figure out for a while why I liked this story so much and not so much a lot of the other stories that they mentioned. I feel like it has to do with the amount of impact that it had, because they went from having a whole bunch of violent incidents to 0 violent incidences during this 7-month trial period I mentioned at the U.S. Naval Correctional Center in Seattle. So that's pretty drastic. And the rest of them, there's usually percentage statistics that go along with them. Like if you do this, then you see a 10% increase, which is obviously a lot. And I'm just like, no, it's not. It feels a lot less impactful. And I think it has a lot to do with just the scope of the change that was implemented from the concepts that he's talking about. And this one is so strong that everything else feels pretty weak by comparison.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you that this particular story was one that stood out to me way more than any of the others. So much so that, like, and we'll get into the outline here, like there's a lot of stories here, but not a lot of them stood out to me. Like having just finished reading this very recently, I don't have a lot of the stories and the studies that I could just readily recall and repeat to you. Like, there's not a lot of those, partially because it was such a huge influx of them. Mm-hmm. But I think, this is my speculation, I think that particular story struck me similar to the way it did you, partially because it was the first story we read that involved things that we normally think of that don't have any impact on us, but actually have a big impact on us.
Yep.
Like that seemed like this story broke that barrier when none of the rest of the stories did, because that had already been broken down. So maybe that's why it had that impact. It could also be that I'm speculating that just because now I don't trust anything because of this book. So like, I feel like everybody's trying to impose something on me now. So,
well, let's get into some of these other stories, and I feel like as we compare them, that the listeners can decide for themselves. But I feel like that the proof is in the pudding here. So, after this introduction section, which talks about Drunk Tank Pink, the rest of the book is broken into 3 different sections. Hey, 3 parts.
Whoa, never seen that before.
Part 1 is the world within us. Part 2 is the world between us. And part 3 is the world around us. And each one of these sections has 3 different chapters. So the first section, the world within us, let's start here. There's 3 chapters here which talk about names, labels, and symbols. Now, in the names section, when I started this chapter, I was really looking forward to this because I personally believe, based on my belief system, that names are very important. And if you study Christianity and Judaism, the names that they gave people when they were born, that was kind of like a proclamation of who they were going to be. Okay. And my wife and I kind of believe that as well. So the beginning of this chapter, the chapter is called Names, the Birth of Nominative Determinism. I thought this was going to be totally in line with like the other stuff that I've read and the importance of names and stuff like that. But that's not really what you find here. You find a story about this guy who was born to Vyacheslav and Marina, and his name is, ready for this?
Yeah, good luck. All right.
BOHDVF260602. And it stands for Biological Object Human Descendant of Voronus and, I don't even know how to pronounce these, VORONIS and FROLOVAS, which I believe were the last names of the parents. Born on June 26, 2002. What in the world? And the reason they give behind this is that they wanted to escape the implicit meaning of the name that they would give their son. On page 9, they have a quote. It says, "This will make life easier. My son will be void of his father's legacy." But I have so many issues with this in particular.
But even with that, like, you still have to refer to him as something.
Exactly.
And you're not going to say, hey, BOHDVF 2602602, whatever it is. Like, you're not going to yell at your kid that way. It's just not going to happen. So they call him Botch.
Yep.
And when I saw it, I was like, wait, is that because you botched his name? Like, is that why you
probably
did that? But yeah, I thought this was just
here's a crazy idea. How about you take ownership of the legacy that you're going to leave your son and make it a good one?
Sure. Yeah.
That's my goal. Like, why? This just bothers me. Why do we assume that they should not want to be associated with anything that their parents did? I feel like with some situations, and they share a little bit of the backstory, I believe this guy's dad was not something that he was proud of, basically, and he wanted to move away from that. But you don't have to change your name in order to say, the buck stops here. You can make choices and chart your own course without resorting to naming your kids a bunch of random numbers and letters. But this is just the beginning of the weirdness in this chapter, because the other story, which again, like, this is the type of thing he uses to make his points, and I was just scratching my head like, huh? He said a 1979 study found that 38% of the top 200 brand names began with a K or a C sound. Okay, I guess maybe that's interesting. And 93% had the K sound somewhere in their names. So kind of the connection that he's making here is the power of the K sound and the power of the brand. And I was like, huh? Like, just because you name something, and I, just as an example, a local company here, Kimberly-Clark, like, that totally fits his description here. Or maybe it's just an easy name to say, and that's what people think of when they need to go buy diapers. I mean, seriously, we don't need to look too much into this stuff, I think. And I feel like we're trying to make all these connections that aren't really there with a lot of these stories that he tells.
So I don't know about that particular piece of it, but the big beef I had with the whole book, okay? He gives study after study after study. No problem with that. He gives tons and tons of examples, shows how correlations with things like a cuss sound in a name. Like, I run a business called Procourse, so we have that in our name.
Which you obviously picked that because you wanted your brand to be successful, right?
I only picked it because we work on discourse. So I was trying to do professional discourse. So Procourse, that's why. That's where it came from. I don't think I've ever said that publicly. That's where it came from.
So if you would have called it Pro Software, you would be at least 20% less successful than you are right now.
Totally. Completely. That's exactly the way it would work. My beef with all of the studies and everything is that a lot of times he would refer to, we had 40 people come in and do this, or we had 50 people, we had 25 people, we took a small sample of this class. That's a real, like, I'm a contract data analyst right now. Data matters to me, and those are tiny, tiny numbers.
Yes.
Like that. So if I have a big beef, it's like what you're talking about here to some degree. It's that they are making some pretty big arching claims when the pool and the information and the research and the science behind it is kind of flaky to me.
Small sample sizes and small findings. Like if you've got 40 people and you see an 8% increase, you cannot make a connection there. That's just, there's not enough there.
Yeah, I think it would, like, the 8% piece, I'm not sure I would say that, because it depends on what you're talking about. Sometimes 8% is huge. Sometimes it's tiny. That's just my take on it. I think it depends on what we're talking about. But with all of the studies, sometimes they would talk about there were 15,000 people a part of this, or they reviewed 100,000 data points from the MLB. Like, they would refer to that. Like, those I get. But when you're talking about, we looked at the last 15 games of this sports team, like, well, that's one season. Like, that season may have been weird. So I had a hard time with some of that. I don't think I would argue that they saw the changes or saw the differences. Like, those are statistical differences that they're talking about. So yes, given that particular study, I would agree that that change or that thing was there. Do the names matter? Well, in the sample they chose, yeah. Does the cuss sound make a difference and help companies be successful? Maybe.
Right.
Like, possibly. I'll at least think about it next time.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a thing that's there. But I feel
what
like...
What are you going to do with that?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'll pay attention to it when I name things in the future. Possibly. Just because... And I've seen this a number of times. I run across companies that don't have a hard consonant like that in their name. And they're kind of harder names to say and make sure that you're saying them clearly. So something like Procourse, like, it's very clear what we're talking about. There's not really any piece of that that's hard to grasp. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about some of that, Mike. There's definitely pieces of it that I'm like, maybe that's what you're getting at, but you're kind of grasping at straws in some cases.
Well, just to give you another example going into the next chapter on labels and the impact that this had on me. So he's sharing all of these numbers from all of these different studies. I basically took notes on the studies and stopped writing down the numbers because I thought they were meaningless.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He mentions QWERTY, for example, and I know you're a Dvorak fan.
Yep.
Right? So QWERTY is the keyboard layout that is predominant in probably every keyboard that you would see that's not custom. And it was originally created to keep the typewriters from jamming. So they spaced out the keys that people use most frequently so they didn't come from the same section of the typewriter and didn't jam. But he talks about the layout for this and how people prefer right-handed words. And I was like, what? So those would be words that have like the letters on the right side of the keyboard. So U, I, O, J, K, L, M, N. P.
Yeah, I was just like, wait,
And-
what are those? Because I'm looking down at my keyboard. It's like, wait, those letters aren't there. What's on where's? I don't have a QWERTY keyboard in front of
Right.
me.
Well, yeah, I've got a QWERTY keyboard, so I have a frame of reference.
Okay.
But when he said that, I was like, that's garbage. There's no way I prefer right-handed words. If anything, you're talking about the hard consonant sounds, like the k from the C, or even like QWERTY that starts with a Q. So people should prefer the left-handed words. And the connection that he made is like, well, most people are right-handed, so they like those words that they type with their right hand better, kind of subconsciously. And I was like, number one, if this is true, there is absolutely no application that is going to come from this. And number two, I don't think it is true. So it's based on your small sample sizes.
I that particular one, I thought was kind of odd because I typed Dvorak, so that doesn't make any sense. But my other question to him that I was asking, but he didn't answer. Though I have been a long time ago, I had an action item to make contact or email, send a letter or something to the authors. I've been doing that for a while, by the way. So I have that as a particular point that I wanted to email Adam about, because I wondered if it wasn't necessarily that people are right-handed, therefore they prefer right-handed words, as much as they're more dominant in their right hand, so it's easier to type with their right hand. So it wasn't a matter of about a preference for words as much as just a muscle memory on that particular hand is more sophisticated. Maybe, I don't know. Know
People
if
are
that's
so
true or
bad
not.
at typing that they just go the path of least resistance.
Yeah,
that's kind of what your theory is.
Yep. It's just easier that way. But I will say Dvorak is superior.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I maybe that's going to be an action item for me at some point, just to give that a shot, but it's not going to be this day.
All right, so side note, if you ever do that, you have to commit, and you're just going to have to deal with it for about a year. Like, that's not I'm going to try this for a couple weeks decision. Like, that's you got to try this for 9 to 12 months before you're going to be able to make a decision one way or the other. Like, that's not a short-term experiment.
Yeah. So we'll stick a pin in that one.
Surprised it's worth pinning.
Yeah. I'm just because I know it's going to come up again.
Okay.
And I have been curious about that. I did a keyboard experiment at one point for when I was working with Asian Efficiency with a blank keyboard.
Yeah.
The thought process being that no key markings would force me to become a touch typist, and my words per minute would go up. And that is, in fact, what had happened, because I charted my progress over a series of like 3 weeks. But yeah, I'm not currently conducting experiments on myself. So
Fair enough.
there were a couple interesting sections in this chapter, though. I thought there was a section on colors and labels, and they mentioned that Russians have separate words for light blue and dark blue.
Oh, I was fascinated
That actually
by
makes
this.
it easier for them to distinguish between things in a test because they have different labels attached to them. I thought that was really interesting. And then he kind of applies that to how labels can be arbitrary, going into like race and skin color. He mentions Tiger Woods told Oprah one time that he was Cablinasian, which was interesting.
Yeah.
It's a combination of Caucasian, Black, Indian, and Asian. And there was a story in here about Jane Elliott's third grade classroom, which I thought was really interesting, because she had a student ask her why Martin Luther King Jr. had gotten shot. So she did this experiment so everyone in the class could feel discrimination. What she did is she told the blue-eyed students that they were superior to the brown-eyed students, and they had to wear paper armbands, and they couldn't drink from certain water fountains. And then those groups acted according to the position that they were given, and then on the following Monday, she had them reverse the roles, told the brown-eyed students that they were superior to the blue-eyed students. By the time the experiment was over, both sides felt terrible, and they were hugging and commiserating about this experiment, and basically nobody wanted to ever have that discrimination applied to them or come from them ever again.
Oh, that was a really cool experiment.
I did too.
It's like, that's interesting. Like, huh. Why is that? That's kind of an odd... Like, to me, it was kind of an odd thing to choose, eye color. like, because my immediate thing was to pick something like hair color just because it's more prominent and easier to see. But regardless, the experiment stands, and I think the kids definitely got the point from the way it sounds.
Yeah, definitely. There was another study in this section, I believe it was an older one, like 1964, where they applied the label of bloomer at random to kids, and then the people who got that label, their IQ actually increased, and they outperformed their peers simply because they had gotten this label of bloomer by 10 to 15 IQ points. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because IQ is one of those things that you typically feel like you're born with this. You know, I mentioned emotional intelligence on this podcast probably way too much, but that's kind of one of the distinguishing factors in the emotional intelligence world is that emotional intelligence can be developed unlike your IQ. So it doesn't matter where you start, basically, as long as you have a growth mindset and you're looking to improve, like you can develop those skills. But basically, this study is saying that IQ can be impacted too simply by a label and the perspective that you apply to yourself. So,
yeah,
interesting.
Now, I do want to say, well, there's one more section in this first part about symbols, but the names and labels piece, for whatever reason, when I finish reading those two sections, I tend to pause between chapters when I'm reading, and it occurred to me that this is something that Apple takes advantage of heavily. And I'm not sure a lot of people catch it, but they're very particular with the way they name things. I think everybody knows that. They're pretty particular with the way that they label things, and sometimes whenever they do those two things, they get a lot of ridicule. Like, why are you calling this the iPad Air? It should be the 3. Like, come on. But that's really important because of the way that your mind thinks about it, whether you intend to think about it that way or not. Like all of the terminology they use at their Apple events, like think about the way that they present these things. Like even when Steve Jobs did this, he's like the parent of all of that mentality. He's like, he would refer to things as the most elegant, a revolutionary device. Like he referred to things that way. And despite your arguments for or against his statement, it was already implanted in your brain and you had a hard time. Like you had to actually refute it. Otherwise people just accepted it, carte blanche. So yeah, I think this is a very interesting part. Again, we need to cover symbols, but I couldn't help seeing the connection that Apple takes advantage of all of this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did not make that connection when I read it, maybe because of the phrasing of this section, the world within us. I don't know. I guess when I read that, I kind of felt like,
yeah,
the external factors haven't entered into the equation yet, but I do think you're right that marketers recognize these things and they use them to their advantage.
Right.
And it's interesting, probably not a conversation for right now, but where is the line there with the responsibilities that the companies have to call things what they are and not prey on people's, I don't know, not prejudices, but the way that they're wired, and because you want to obviously sell more of your widgets and your services and stuff like that. So you want to position things correctly, but if you do it in a certain way where you're manipulating the people that you're supposedly serving, that's not good either. So that's a tough balancing act there for pretty much anybody who works on the interwebs, I think.
Yeah. Right. The last piece here before we move on to the second part, symbols. All kinds of examples that he shares here. Probably the most prominent one was the swastika.
Yep.
Everybody knows what I'm talking about now. And even whenever I said that, internally, you had a reaction, usually negative, hopefully negative. It's interesting how he does spell out how that particular symbol did exist before World War II.
Yep.
Not mainstream, but it did exist. But the meaning behind it that became a part of that symbol post World War II, now it's considered a symbol of hate just to have that symbol anywhere. It's completely taken on a different life form from what it used to be. So symbols are very, very important and invoke a lot of feelings and meaning behind them in the fraction of a second. That was something that I thought was kind of interesting, because they would refer to these some studies where they would have someone looking at a screen and then they would show an image for like 1 or 2 frames, which is so fast that you really can't tell what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it would have an effect on their results. Like they would, be mean towards another student or be kind to them, depending on whether or not they saw or had the image of a swastika shown to them versus the image of a church. Like having those two competing with each other. You can't even recognize what it is. How is it supposed to have an effect on you? But apparently it did. Did they do it enough times? I don't know. I don't know if it's just speculation, but I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, this is where I start to call BS. So I understand that symbols have meaning, and based on the symbols that you show people, it can impact the way that you look at things around that particular symbol. And that was one of the studies that they did in this section on priming. They mentioned symbols can prepare us for particular thoughts or behaviors. The swastika is kind of associated with aggression, hatred, anger, and negativity. So one study they did showed that students who were exposed to the swastika were primed to associate a character with being immoral and to deserve extreme punishment. And the number that they shared here was they were 10% more likely to do this. And at this point, I'm like, well, duh. So the swastika is not something that you see every single day. Maybe if it was more normalized, people would just not be impacted by it. But if you're seeing a series of images and you see a picture of if someone were to show me a series of images and all of a sudden there's a swastika there, it's kind of jarring because it's not something that you see every day. And those things that have that sort of shock value, they do put you in a certain state of mind. So obviously everything else that you're going to be looking at after that, your brain is kind of on guard, is like, okay, so we are looking at some crazy stuff here. And so you're kind of leaning that way where maybe you wouldn't be normally leaning that way. At least the way I'm wired, I would not normally be leaning that way. Does that make sense?
It does to me, yep.
Yeah. So the fact that, they're 10% more likely to assume that a character has impure motives and deserves punishment when they're shown a picture of a swastika, that just seems natural to me. And honestly, 10%, this is one of those ones where it's like, you're going to use that number to justify your claims, really? Like, I would expect this to be like 50%.
Yeah.
It's almost like so little that it's not even worth mentioning.
Right.
And I just think that, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to assume that everything you watch on TV is sending you subliminal messages and you got to be on guard against this stuff? I don't think that's any sort of solution. So you deal with this junk when you see it, but other than that, like, why worry about it?
I don't know if it's so much worrying about it, it's just being aware of it. Just my thought.
I guess, but I already know swastikas are bad. So why do I need to be told that swastikas are bad?
Fair point.
I don't know. And then also, like he mentions that these symbols, they don't have any meaning until they're associated with some existing meaningful concepts. Okay. So if you are a child who knows nothing about World War II, Adolf Hitler, and Nazi Germany, and you see a swastika, are you naturally leaning that way? I'm guessing probably not. Okay, so for somebody who doesn't have negative associations with certain symbols, and I would argue the swastika probably is one that you want people to associate negative feelings with. When you see this, this is bad. Okay, stay away from this symbol. But to a lesser degree, do we need to explain things in a way where it's like, oh, you shouldn't do this because this is the way that it can be interpreted? Like, to a certain degree, I kind of think for some of this stuff, ignorance is bliss. I guess the Bible way to define it would be, to the pure, all things are pure. Like, why do we have to teach all the subliminal possible messaging with every single symbol that we have so that we can be manipulated by them, if that makes sense? Or
just seeing how other people are attempting to use them against you. that was maybe the piece of this that I enjoyed through all of these different pieces, was that it showed me how a lot of people are trying to, like, specifically attempting to use these things against me and to influence me, and to be aware of that, to combat it to some degree. Like that was kind of my after about a chapter or two, that was kind of the mindset that I took with it.
Gotcha. Okay. So my next question then would be, why do we want to be so aware? And I'll use the term worried. Maybe you're not worried, but I feel like if you're going to be made aware of what potential impact things around you can have, that's kind of the logical next step, is like, oh my gosh, this stuff has been impacting me for so long and I didn't even realize it, right? So now I'm on the lookout for everything. Why not flip this, and instead of worrying or being concerned about the things that other people are trying to influence you with, why not just internalize your own set of symbols, your own values, vision, whatever, and just make that super strong so it overrides everything else? I totally get what you're saying, and that's kind of the way that this chapter is positioned. It's like all these things are around you and they're impacting you all the time. But that's not the real application of this in any sort of positive form, I feel. Like, people are selfish, people are jerks, they want what's best for them. And so whenever anybody else is showing you symbols, you should have that reaction of like, oh, how are they trying to manipulate me? Like, there's the potential for that anyways. And really the only sort of beneficial application of this is like, okay, so what are the things that really mean a lot to you? What are the things that you really want to internalize and say, like, this is who I am, this is what I do? That's a positive application of the symbols, but that's not really what he talks about at all.
Yeah. I think my take on this, and we got to keep moving here, but my take on it is that I don't know that I'm trying to watch out for it to see where people are trying to influence me and then reject that. I'm just somebody who likes to pick up details. Like, I like to pick up subtleties. I like to notice that sort of thing. Not for any real, I don't think, for any real meaningful action from that, as much as just my own curiosity. Maybe there's some strategic things that come with that just in daily life, but overall, I just like to notice things. Like, that's my own preference on that. I don't really know why I do that, but I do.
Fair enough.
All right, part 2, The World Between Us.
Yeah, so this again has 3 different chapters. I'm not sure how much of this will go into. The first one, chapter 4, is the mere presence of other people. Chapter 5 is the characteristics of other people, the social motives, and then number 6 is culture, seeing objects and places through a cultural lens. The first one here, the mere presence of other people, it's in the eyes. If I were to sum this up in a single thought, it would basically be that the image of a pair of eyes, whether it is a actual pair of eyes belonging to another person or simply a picture of a pair of eyes, can cause you to do what's right. Is that fair?
Yeah, which is kind of interesting because, okay, this might get deep, but there's a body of thought in our culture, maybe this belongs in the culture section of this, that states that humans are inherently good people. This directly contradicts that.
Yeah.
Because it states that people become better morally and ethically if they feel that they are being watched by other people, but that they are inherently more evil or more bad when they feel like they're in isolation on their own and no one's watching them. That's basically what I took away from this.
Yep.
So I know that a lot of people have a tendency to think that we're good people. We just are, led to bad things. If you read this particular section, you can't help but see the opposite. So
people are jerks and less convinced to act nicely.
Yep.
Through manipulation or through brute force, punishment. I mean, because there's a lot of different examples here. One of them, they mentioned that people paid almost 3 times as much to the honesty box when there was a picture of a pair of eyes implying that they were being watched. So basically, if you bought something from the company cafeteria, whatever, there was a box where you were supposed to put your money, and if you're there and no one's watching you, you're tempted to just grab your thing and not put any money in the box. But you're 3 times more likely to put the money in just because there's a picture of a pair of eyes there. But there's also examples from here that have to do with like the police departments. And there was one called Operation Momentum where they put up posters which featured a pair of piercing eyes, as he puts it, with the slogan, "We've got our eyes on criminals." And local officers reported a 17% reduction in robberies from these signs, which is not a small thing. But then there are other examples which, I don't know, maybe this is a bigger deal than it sounds, but they used the O-Power company, which got people to reduce their power usage by 2.5% by giving them symbols that went along with their power usage. So people who did great got a couple smiley faces. People who did well got a single smiley face. And they're saying that, isn't this great? Simply by using these symbols, we're able to reduce power consumption by a ton. And he did throw out some specific numbers of like the amount of money that it saved and stuff like that. But 2.5% really doesn't sound like a whole lot to me. And
yeah, but this is where, like, sure, 10% of one thing doesn't sound like a whole lot, but 2% of this is actually a huge number. I forget what it was. It was millions of dollars.
Yeah, but based off of how many people, I mean, there's millions of dollars for tens of millions of people could or could not be a lot. And I feel like by saying, oh, these symbols are the thing that drove 2.5%, decreased the usage by 2.5%, what were the other options and what was the other impact? So you could say like, oh, look at this made a big impact, but I kind of feel like there's a lot of other stuff that you could do that could make a 2.5% difference or greater. And it's kind of weird to say like, oh, this is the thing, which is kind of how all this stuff is presented, is like, oh, look at this specific example. Isn't this thing great? Everybody should do this sort of thing. And then backs it up with some numbers. And 2.5% is so low that he actually did have to give some dollar value here. But when your sample size is big enough, those numbers almost mean nothing. You know, it's kind of like if people talk about the budget of the United States and wasting millions of dollars. Well, when you're dealing with billions and trillions of dollars, millions don't really matter.
Right.
You know, so it's all based on the scale here. And then also because he's selecting these stories and presenting them to us, we really don't know what any of the other options were.
To defend O-Power, the smileys was the only thing they changed that led to that.
Yep.
Everything was operating the same, which is why I think that's an interesting number. I did look it up. It's 1 billion kilowatt hours. So I guess my question to you is, if you didn't know the 2.5% per person number, but you were told the billion kilowatt hours number, like that, it sounds a lot more impressive than 2.5%.
Yeah, but when you say, oh my gosh, the United States Senate is slashing our budget by millions of dollars.
Oh, right, yeah.
Billions to work with. It's the same effect. It's like, oh my, how could they do that? Those jerks, don't they care about the kids? But when I think about my own power usage and you were to say, okay, figure out a way to decrease your power usage by 2.5%. Okay, that's not a lot. I could do that very easily. And could you instigate that with a couple of symbols on my bill? Maybe, but there's got to be more effective ways to do that too. You know, like one of the things that I think about when I think about my situation and how do you make this decrease by 2.5%, just get the kids to turn off the lights when they leave the room.
Yeah.
That would make a much bigger difference than 2.5%. And I'm not going to show them a smiley face and then all of a sudden they're going to get that.
All right, so second chapter here, the characteristics of other people. This chapter, it's entirely based on Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I, for a long time, have struggled with that particular pyramid.
Yes.
So to have an entire chapter dedicated to it and then have him skip past the validity of that pyramid and just accept it without any, qualms whatsoever, and just accept it as truth to stand on, that I kind of struggled with.
Yep.
But I had to just kind of set that aside and say, okay, you're not even going to touch on this, so let's just go with the rest of the chapter, not worry about the pyramid itself, but let's talk about the individual aspects. So just getting that off my chest, the core basis of this I struggled with.
I had the same reaction. And to be honest, looking back at this, talking through it now, it really shouldn't have been a surprise, because that's how he frames every single argument that he uses. He's like, oh, look, here's this thing. Here's the research that supports it. It's obviously true. On to the next one. And I also have my own issues with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because on one level it makes sense. And just for people who have never heard this before, Maslow basically says there's 5 different levels: physiological, and then when you have those needs met, you move on to safety. When you have those needs met, you go on to love and belonging. When you have those needs met, you go on to self-esteem. And then when you have those needs met, you go to self-actualization. Personally, as someone who has created a video course called Faith-Based Productivity with the tagline, connect to your calling, discover your destiny, live the life you were created for, I basically take the approach that this is all backwards. And you should think about what's the impact that you want to have. Why are you here? What's your purpose? What's the thing that you're designed to do? And then do that, and the rest of the stuff is going to take care of itself. And obviously, there's a lot of detail that goes with that. If you are in a soul-sucking job that you hate right now, you cannot just quit and follow your passion. And let's not even go there, but I've got my own definition of passion. It's not what people think. But that being said, like the real way to get to the end of your life and say, yes, I have lived a fulfilled life, is to start with the end in mind, like Stephen Covey talks about. It's not to climb this hierarchy of needs, because if you do that, you'll never get to the self-actualization, I feel like, for a lot of people. And so that kind of tainted my perspective too, he talks about the sexual motive, the safety motive, and then the power of loved ones in this chapter.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what else to say about this particular chapter. It was just, he goes through each of those levels in the pyramid and explains how we seek those out. That was pretty much what it was about.
Sure. Well, one thing I want to call out here under the sexual motive, because they use this statistic that men are more than 3.5 times more likely to die from accidental causes than women. So basically, men are stupid, and he's really saying that men are doing this as a way to show that they are strong, daring, whatever, and in a way to attract female attention. There probably is an element of that. I think a big part of this, though, is just guys don't think stuff through sometimes. You ever see those pictures, like the guy standing on the ladder that's like precariously balanced?
Never done that in my life.
Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff like that. I mean, it's, again, common sense if you see this sort of thing. And he talks about the presence of a beautiful female causes the male to produce more testosterone, which is really the thing that gets him to do this dumb stuff. He talks about how male chess players were more likely to employ risky moves when their opponent was an attractive female. I don't know. I think the summary here is that men and women are different. Go figure.
I don't know. I had a hard time arguing with him on the whole testosterone, things are different thing. I think there's probably a lot of truth to that one.
Well, one other quick thought on this, okay? As a heterosexual male in a committed relationship, okay? So basically, if I'm taking this stuff at face value, he is saying that if I am in the presence of a beautiful female, that is going to cause me to produce more testosterone, and I'm going to do stupid stuff in order to get sex from her. That's not true, okay? I may have that temptation, but that is not going to happen. And maybe that's just my religious belief system talking, and that's coloring my perspective with this. But I kind of feel like in certain situations like mine, where I have given up all the other sexual options for my life, and so does that mean that I don't have these reactions, these urges? No, but it doesn't mean that I'm doing it in order to get with the other person. And so that's kind of the disconnect for me, and I'm trying to resolve this in my head. Like, you saying that me, where like I've sworn this off, and it's not an option for me, but it's still going to be an instinctive reaction for me, and it's going to cause me to do all this stupid stuff. I kind of think that's probably not true.
So 2 things here. One, you did state like this is your, like, you're not saying you don't have the temptation, you just don't act on it. So that's part 1.
Self-control, go figure.
Yep, self-control. Part 2, all of those studies that they did that involved young males. Like, they were talking like teens and early 20s most of the time. I had a hard time with him taking that and extrapolating it out because testosterone levels do change over time. So I would have a hard time seeing how that would apply to somebody in their 80s. What?
True.
That doesn't... So anyway, he didn't call that out at all. He didn't make any adjustments based on age or any aspect of that. Are you going to have the urges? Very likely. Are you going to act on them? That depends on your own ability to control yourself and your belief systems. So that's my thought.
Yeah. Well, another thing I didn't think about till just now, you mentioned young men, and I forget specifically when your brain stops developing, but it's not till you're like age 25. So by doing
24, 25, yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So let's say you're doing this with college students. Their brain isn't fully developed yet.
Right.
They're literally idiots. Sorry, guys. I was there too. You think you're seeing your situation correctly, and you're not, because your brain is not fully developed. So why are we studying these people? Anyways.
All right. So culture. let's just move on. All right. I don't think it's any surprise that culture impacts us. Just the variety of ways that culture develops, the things that exist around us, but also the fact that different cultures operate differently. He does call out the extreme difference between individualistic and collectivistic societies. The United States being an individualistic culture where people take care of themselves. Like I don't think he used these terms. It's not all about me, but I take care of myself first. Number one, first.
Yep.
Whereas a lot of countries like China and Japan have collectivistic societies where everything they do and everything they see is seen through the lens of taking care of the community at large, and everything they do in their own lives is designed to be helpful to the broader community as opposed to themselves.
Yep.
And the one story he told about this that really impacted me was the fact that, and I forget what the details of the experiment, like what they were testing for, but he stated that people who are from an individualistic background, if they're presented a picture, say, of an automobile with a backdrop of the woods, a wooded area, people from, say, the United States would tend to focus on the car. And if you were to ask them some details about the car later, they could tell you the color of it, maybe the make and model of it, like they would be able to tell you that. But for the most part, they wouldn't be able to tell you much about the background because they hadn't focused on that. They focused on the single point in front of them.
Yep.
Folks that grew up in collectivism, they would see the entire picture. They wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you what color the car was. They wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you, what was in the background, but they could at least tell you it was a wooded background with a car, whereas the folks in the U.S. would say, yeah, there was a car, but I don't remember if it was in a mountainous area, if it was in a wooded area, was it on the highway? Like, they may not be able to tell you where it was, but they would be able to tell you that it was a car. To me, that was just an intriguing connection point. I had never really heard that particular way of saying it. I've always known like cultures are very different. I run a web dev business and work with, almost 70% of our clients are international. So I work with a lot of different regions throughout the world, which is fascinating. but certain areas you need to have conversations differently because they see things differently. So I don't know. I thought it was a very fascinating chapter.
Yeah, he mentioned specifically with the art example that you were talking about, the Western world tends to zoom in on the face and highlight the person. The Eastern world focuses on more contextual detail in the background. I'm also curious how much this is impacted by the current state of the culture that we live in. Like, we just did digital minimalism last episode, and the smartphone and all of this information that we're constantly bombarded with. And I kind of feel like as the amount of information that you're presented with increases, you probably lose at least a little bit the ability to look at the context and the background, because there's so many things just flying at your face and you're just trying to keep up with things. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but and maybe that's the cultural difference there too. But I kind of am curious how a collective society responds to the endless feeds and the infinity pools differently than maybe we do.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I don't have an answer to that, but it's interesting.
Yeah, me either. The other thing I really like from this section, by the way, is this conversation about the culture of honor. And the way he frames this kind of ticked me off, because he mentions that the culture of honor is prevalent in the South and the West, and typically there's more entrenched family values, and it's absent from the northern states because we don't have the same cultural expectations. And I think that the whole idea of honor is really something that in the United States anyways, that we've lost and would solve a lot of things for us. Just something simple like, what's the terminology I'm looking for? When we were talking about the Atul Gawande book, you know, he mentioned his grandpa in India, and he could basically do whatever he wanted because everybody honored the elderly. You know,
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore. And not that you should automatically get honored because you get older. I think that's a simple example of how if we treated our elders with more respect, only good comes from that. But it could apply to people in authority. You see all of the nastiness on social media, Twitter specifically, and some of it is self-solicited. You know, when you've got a president who's tweeting crazy stuff, people are going to respond to it. But even before that, you know, you see people in these authority positions, and people are just sending this nasty stuff. And every time I see it, I'm like, how can you possibly talk like that to somebody like this? And I don't know, maybe that's just my, what's the term I'm looking for here? Obviously my upbringing and the way that I've been taught to view people and things and situations, but I don't see a negative that comes from this. And the way that it's kind of framed, it's kind of like, well, this is an antiquated idea, and the northern states are more progressive, and they've kind of done away with this. But I think we could go a long way towards thinking better of people.
Yeah, I think so. I grew up in Missouri in kind of the backwoods area, so there was a pretty high amount of honor and respect was expected. And I've spent a decent amount of time in the southern states, you know, down in the Texas, Alabama area. And I know that in the deep South, there's a much higher expectation for this honor culture than what there is right now in Minnesota. Like, to me, it's just massive. It's just worlds different between those two. So having that background, I was agreeing with him left and right when he was going through all of it. I'm not real sure how I feel about your thoughts on like honor being something that would help us a lot. I haven't really thought that through, but it's an interesting, you know, thought pattern that I kind of want to explore. Maybe you and I should talk about that at some point, but that's something I haven't thought about. It's kind of an interesting thought, Mike.
Yeah, well, I kind of the way I view it is that when you don't have honor towards whoever you esteem highly, typically your perspective is just looking out for yourself, what's in it for me. And I feel like any sort of perspective shift that gets your eyes off of your own problems and onto the solving and helping the needs and of others, that's going to be a net win. And I feel like you don't have to have a religious belief system in order to recognize that we've got it for the most part pretty good. And then when we focus on everything that's going wrong in our lives, we can quickly get discouraged, depressed.
Sure.
And one of the quickest ways to snap out of that is to go serve somebody else.
Right.
And when you think about honor, the emphasis or the focus is on the other person, and you're kind of forcing yourself to see things through their eyes. And you could apply the whole concept of honor to whoever has earned it in your particular worldview. I still think that it's missing, and it's something that we should be implementing. I feel like it's one of those safeguards that can keep us from doing a lot of stupid, selfish stuff if we really understood it.
Yeah. All right, part 3, the world around us. Colors, locations, weather, and warmth. And the first piece of this, colors, I came at this from a view of the website world, where colors are used very specifically. There's a lot of theory around different colors that people use for buttons and backgrounds and fonts, and all of that has very specific uses. People don't always realize this, but Google is always testing that. Facebook has tested it. Tons and tons of sites have tested this. There's a reason a lot of the mainstream social media sites are all blue. Like, there are reasons for that. And they're trying to not necessarily manipulate, but they're trying to increase time you spend with things or increasing clicks. And simple things like colors make a huge impact in the website world. So I see it a lot from that stance. I've seen companies test 12 different shades of blue buttons to see which one gets more clicks, and it drives a bottom line depending on which shade of blue they pick for a buy now button. Like, it's just nuts how that impacts people. So there's a lot of truth to this one. I had a hard time arguing with it.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely, this section, I had I don't want to say the least negative reaction, but like you said, when I read through this stuff, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I agree with that for the most part. One of the things that did kind of stand out to me was in the 2004 Olympics. He mentions that the wrestlers who wore red instead of blue won 62% of the matches. I'm not sure where I land on this one yet. I kind of feel like, just based on the color uniform that you're assigned, that shouldn't necessarily impact you in terms of like, oh, I got the blue one, so I'm fighting an uphill battle. That seems kind of ridiculous to me. But I do agree that generally speaking, the colors can elicit different reactions. He does talk a lot in here about the cultural differences with the colors too, though. So he mentions that most of the world likes blue, but Hong Kong actually associates it with sadness. And the U.S. likes black because it shows strength and masculinity, but Colombia doesn't because it implies sadness and formality. So a lot of this stuff is interpreted through the lens of the culture that you're familiar with as well.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know that I have a lot to say on the colors piece. Things like red is a color of love, and he goes through like the reasons for that. Blue is calming. Pink, of course, can disarm people from violence. Like, there's different colors, and he doesn't go through all the colors, but he does spell out quite a bit with those. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
There's one thing I want to touch on here, because he mentions the Glasgow police. They installed the blue lights instead of the standard white or yellow lights.
Yeah.
That was not that interesting to me, but then he uses another example right after that on blue light being installed at a sawmill in Canada, which caused night workers to be more alert and make fewer mistakes. Okay, now this, I believe, has nothing to do with the color and has everything to do with the concept of the blue light causing your body to not produce the melatonin that causes you to fall asleep. And I say that just because I've had Flux installed on my computer for years. I swear by it. And this is one of those things that I've studied out quite a bit because I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 18 years old. So one of the things that can trigger a seizure is not enough sleep. So I have been very militant in both the amount of sleep that I get and also doing everything I can to control the quality of sleep that I get. I cannot have a bad night's sleep and not sleep because it could literally cause a seizure the next day. And if I'm driving my car, obviously that's a big disaster. All right. So I really believe in this idea of the blue light, and it's been something that I've been controlling for a number of years. Try not to look at screens before I go to bed because I've noticed for myself, and some people say I don't notice any difference. I believe there really is a difference here, where the quality of sleep that you get when you don't look at your phone for 3 hours before you go to bed, as opposed to if you're scrolling through Twitter before you lay down and go to sleep, you're going to have a lot harder time falling asleep. And so I don't know that this has anything to do with colors, but the blue light idea is definitely a powerful one. And I couldn't quite reconcile in my head how this fit in the colors section.
Oh, because of the melatonin aspect?
Yeah, because that's really the thing that's going on here is the blue light versus like the artificial candlelight or whatever, where your body is kind of transitioning into that state of sleep. Well, you've got people who are going directly against their body's grain by working at night.
Right.
So the color doesn't do anything to inspire them to be more safe. The color causes a physiological change in their body.
Now, to his benefit here, just to defend him a little bit, that particular story was told as an introduction to the chapter, and it was only like a paragraph long, but he was using it to intro the whole thing. Just to defend him on that one, because I don't know that he would disagree with you as much as like he was just using it to introduce the chapter, because I think that would maybe confirm, like he would agree with you in the sense that, yes, this color does have a biological effect, because that would prove his point here that colors do affect us. Like that's not an argument against what he's saying.
Yeah, but
speculating.
When you're talking about the light, for example, I feel like that's a different argument than going back to drunk take pick at the beginning, where you're looking at a piece of paper that is a certain color. I feel like color temperature in terms of light is very different than the policeman's blues. That's the subtitle of this chapter. You know, the color of uniform that you might use, or the color of the lights in the area causing a decrease in crime. Like literally, you are trying to prevent your body from shutting down.
So how is this different? Because way back at the beginning of this, you were talking about how even the color pink increased donations.
Yep.
And you made it sound like that was a good thing, and you agreed with that. How is this now different?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think that the color uniform that you wear increasing donations, like that is a very real thing. And that argument in this chapter would make total sense. But I feel like the blue light argument maybe doesn't quite fit, because this is getting outside of the realm of these are the colors that you see, and it has more to do with the intensity of the light and the impact that it's having in your body at a subconscious level. And maybe I'm not doing a very good job of describing this.
I was going to say, it sounds like you're confirming him.
Well, I don't know. I feel like there's a difference between a color that you would see any other place in the world and the color of the light temperature in the room. I feel like that one, especially as it pertains to keeping your body awake and not entering into a state of sleep, that's a little bit different than causing you to, everything is equal, you're going to act one way or another. Having a choice between how to act is very different than is very different in my mind than trying to keep your body from breaking. Does that make sense?
No, I think you're crazy. So
okay.
I think with his point, like the color itself has a biological edit to your body. Like it does leave an impact on you. Red light would not do that. Yellow light would not do that, but blue light does. Like, I don't get your point of how, because it's a light bulb, the color doesn't matter.
Just as an example, blue light is going to have a certain impact in your body no matter what, right? But the color blue is going to have different impacts based on the culture and the association that is assigned to it.
Okay.
There is no option for assigning anything else to the blue light. The blue light is literally going to keep your body awake. And in my situation, if I was in that situation, the blue light is literally going to keep me awake to the point where my body is going to shut down and I'm going to have a seizure. Okay, regardless of what I would try to do in that particular situation. Whereas if the United Way volunteer comes up wearing a pink shirt, I still have the choice whether I am going to donate and how much I'm going to donate. And I can recognize that, oh, they're wearing the color pink, so I'm more likely to write out a bigger check. Okay, but there's no option when it comes to the blue light.
Why does that matter?
Maybe it doesn't. I don't know, but that's the
that's
thing
his point, is that you don't.
Yeah, that's the thing that makes it different in my own head. And maybe it's just because it's associated with this topic of sleep, which maybe it's just the way that he framed it where I felt like it wasn't really fair, because he's talking about how these blue-green lights cause night workers to be more alert and make fewer mistakes. That wasn't a conscious choice. They weren't saying, oh, well, I'm going to be more safe, as opposed to I don't care what I'm going to do. Like, they're manipulating these people at this point. They're like rats in the machine. And there's nothing they can do about it.
Maybe that's what you're... Because Drunk Tank Pink is the same thing. Because they did some of the testing and found like some of the blood levels of, I forget what it was, some hormone. They found some of that being affected as well. Like that's the same type of thing. Like it's impacting people physiologically.
Yeah.
In the same way that this blue light does.
With Drunk Tank...
Why is one okay and one's not?
Well, with Drunk Tank Pink, you've got the drunk in the cell. And yeah, they're not in their right mind. But they have the ability to choose to not be a crazy drunk anymore. Okay? If I'm exposed to blue light, I don't have a choice anymore. I'm going to stay awake.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where I feel like this is a whole nother level when he's talking about blue light, as it just opposed to the colors and the associations that go with them. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here and in the next section too about the locations and green being in nature, that has a calming effect. Like that's all great. But I feel like with blue light specifically, this is something that like you're manufacturing and you're hacking people's biology, and that just seems so wrong.
That's his point though. See, this is why I'm confused, because I feel like you're confirming his exact point.
Yeah.
Because he's saying this color causes this effect, which is exactly what you're saying. And his point is, like, it does help people. It does do that. It does help them stay awake. He's not arguing whether or not they have a choice or not. That doesn't apply at all. He's saying, and probably most of this book is, in most cases, this is happening whether you want it to or not. But this does happen.
Yep.
Like that's anyway.
Okay.
We should move on. But that was my thinking on it. So I feel like you're confirming it.
Yeah,
but,
I still think it's not resolved. Like in this, he mentions in the mid 40s there was that Aurora tone films that were being introduced, and he mentions that like different colors can calm different people. So it's not as simple as like when people are exposed to this color, it always elicits this reaction. I don't know. Like when it comes to sleep and regulating your body's rhythm. I feel like that's...
You just don't like it.
Like I said, whole nother level. Yeah, you're right. I don't like it. All
right, locations. I don't have a lot on this one other than go outside. Like that's...
Yep.
And maybe I should lump this one in with the other one, weather and warmth. Like most of this was go outside, enjoy nature. It makes you a better person. Like that was my core takeaway between those two sections.
Yeah, there's a couple interesting ideas in here. Number one, and again, this is like, for me, maybe because I'm introverted, but this just seems like the whole idea of overcrowding, how that causes claustrophobia, mental illness, drug addiction, alcoholism, family disorganization, lower quality of life. So get out of that situation whenever you can. I think that's probably associated also with this whole idea of getting out into nature, but kind of the positioning of the nature argument in this chapter has to do with the green environment having a a calming effect. One thing that he talks about in here is the broken windows theory, which says that people are encouraged to act immorally and commit crimes in neighborhoods with broken windows. I don't know. I guess maybe I just don't hang out in those neighborhoods.
Well, just to give you a different story on that, I work in the agriculture industry, grew up on a farm, have a strong ag background. I have met more than a handful of farmers who take meticulous care of their equipment. They have their tractors repainted every 3 years. They make sure everything is in perfect working order. They make sure they get waxed on a regular basis. And it's not because they just like clean and bright colored equipment. They can show, and they've seen this multiple times, that if they take that good of care of their equipment, the people who operate it more safely, and they have fewer repairs. So the repair bills are significantly lower than any I've really seen elsewhere.
Yeah.
Because they take such good care of their equipment. So I don't know. I definitely can get on board with that one.
That makes sense. I kind of am the same way about our family vehicles. Like, it drives me nuts when something isn't in pristine working order.
Right.
Because I know that as soon as one thing is broken, that's kind of a license to not take as good a care of the thing.
Yep.
So I agree with that. But I also think that, like he mentions in one study, half of the drivers littered and threw the flyer tucked on their windshield when the parking lot was already full of litter, but only a tenth of them did when it was clean. I don't know. That I can't see myself in any situation being like, "Yeah, I'm just going to chuck this on the ground."
Right.
So again, a lot of this stuff is probably cultural. And if you are in a situation, in a environment where people don't take care of stuff, maybe that has a bigger impact on whether you're willing to break something or not take care of it than the fact that you notice that there's something broken. You know, I'm not going into my buddy's car and something's broken, so I'm just chucking trash all over.
Yeah. Weather and warmth. Go outside, stay warm.
Yeah.
Again, basically, he talks a lot about SAD, seasonal affective disorder. There's a couple other of these. But anyway, he was showing how during extreme heat, people tend to be more agitated and have road rage more often. Or the big one was Major League Baseball with pitchers hitting each other's batters because the other one did it first and retaliating.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pieces around this. They had a ton of data behind that one. So that one I was definitely like, okay, that one's hard to refute.
Yeah.
But there was a lot there.
I think having played baseball, I kind of think that maybe it has more to do with the fact that the games matter when it's warmer. At the beginning of the season, you're not going out and plunking people on purpose, but by the time you do get to the summer months, there's this whole culture with baseball of like, you gotta protect your players and your teammates and stuff like that. That's always the justification that pitchers give for hitting other people, and you can totally tell when it's intentional and when it's not. And I don't know, every time you see it, they say the right things. Oh, the ball slipped out of my hand, whatever. But you can kind of tell, like, everybody on the team, the managers included, have kind of put their subversive stamp of approval on this thing. So I think it has more to do with the fact that now you're involved in games that matter, and you're not going to let them take out your best player for weeks, months at a time, which can happen when you drill somebody with a 98 mile an hour fastball. Yeah. So I don't know. This argument about the baseball batters getting hit, I know that there's data behind it, but it when it was presented to me, it was presented as someone who really didn't understand baseball. Maybe that's completely unfair, but that was the impression I got when I read it.
Well, the data they had went back to when seasons were not where the important ones were in the summer. Like, it was far enough back that was still like in springtime, because the seasons have gotten a lot longer now. So some of that is somewhat corrected for because of the long history that they pulled it on.
Yep.
So I I don't know. I had a hard time with I have a hard time with your argument against that, but I've played a lot of baseball as well. Like I'm not arguing with you one bit about the protect your player thing at all.
I'm definitely not in the professional ranks, but kind of the ebb and flow to me is like, okay, everybody's excited beginning of the year. All it takes is one person to accidentally get hit. And now all of a sudden you've got somebody's like, oh, I'm going to get him back.
Yep.
Okay. And by the time they get him back, the umps, there's, okay, that's enough. But by the time it gets to the summer, like now you've kind of, there's certain things you can do to encourage right behaviors. And I feel like they're real lax at the beginning of the year. And then, so as a response, pitchers are going to take advantage of that and middle of the year, start to crack down on it a little bit. By the end of the year, it's like, okay, guys, you really got to knock this off because we don't want our superstars hurt going into the postseason. This is what people pay to see. Okay. So if you try that in September or October, like you'll get tossed right away. And so is that a factor of the cold weather making you less angry and you're 5% less likely to decide to hit somebody? Or is it more, I better not screw this up for my team and get tossed out of the game, so I'm just going to let this one slide?
Sure.
Probably a combination of things.
Yeah, there's a lot there. All right, what else, Mike? We should wrap this up.
Seasonal affective disorder. This is a very real thing. It also mentions daylight savings here, which we just went through daylight savings.
Yeah, I hate
daylight savings is a very stupid idea. We should get rid of this.
Yeah.
But he at least explains the thought process behind it. It's an effort to make people happier by exposing them to more sun in the summer. But it can also cause a lot of stress when you have to spring forward. And he mentions that there's 7% higher accident rates the day after daylight savings, which that should be enough to get rid of it right now. Let's just all decide that we're never going to do this again.
Yeah, most hospital stock. That's terrible. They book a lot more nurses and staff for the day after daylight savings. Typically. Sure, because they know.
All right, we should probably wrap it up there, huh?
Yeah. Action items, Zippo.
Yep.
What do you
I
do
also
with this?
have no action items. Although, as I was going through this and thinking about like how can I take action on this book, the one thing that kind of stood out to me is that I can consider my environment in my office, and I can put the right symbols, colors, cues, whatever in there to help me transition into a state of work faster.
Sure.
I'm really not going to put an action item associated with that because I've kind of gone through all that with creating my home office the way it is right now. But if you were to do an action item from this book, I feel like that's the only one you can really implement.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that. Style and rating. So Adam Alter, I will say he's pretty easy to read. Like this is not a difficult book to pick up and go through. Tons and tons of stories. We shared a lot here, but we probably only touched, 15, maybe 20% of them. Maybe not even that. There's a lot to go through here, which keeps it fast moving. That's partly why we weren't real sure how this was going to go because there's so many stories you could cover. Again, super easy to read. It's about the right length, I feel. No arguments against, topic density here at all. As for a rating, it's kind of hard because I had some definite qualms, like really serious qualms with certain pieces of this, but there were other pieces of it. It's like, that is brilliant. I am so happy I know that now. So parts of it, I'm like, yeah, definite 5. And then other parts, I'm like, yeah, definite 2. Like, so what do you do with that?
Average it out.
I think I'm going to drop it at a 4.0. I think I'll put it there. I do think it's worth reading though. Like it's at least enough to spark you to think about things that are going on around you, from a marketing stance, from a livelihood stance, the way things work between people. I think it's worth reading, but there's some issues we've had with it. Obviously, we've talked about those, so I'm putting it at a 4.0.
All right. I am on the fence. I think I'm going to give it a 3.0. I kind of want to give it a 3.5 because there's some good ideas in here. And like you said, there's certain parts of it that really do impact you. but I also found myself arguing with him a lot, and that never felt good. So my overall state of mind as I went through this book was probably more negative than positive.
Sure.
And I just can't shake that. So I'm gonna err on the side of a lower score and put it at 3.0.
All right. Well, let's put it on the shelf. What's next, Mike?
The next book is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And this is a story about taking responsibility from a couple of former Navy SEALs. Have you started this book?
I have not, but I'm itching to.
It's really interesting, regardless of your take on the whole military background, because there obviously is a lot of that. In fact, the chapters are really interesting because they tell a story from their deployment in Iraq, and then they'll go into the principle, and then the third part of each chapter is the business application of the concept.
Interesting.
So they do leadership training for businesses and stuff right now. So they share stories from people that they've worked with.
That sounds really interesting.
It's really interesting. It's a really big book. I think it's like 300 something pages. One of the bigger ones that we've covered.
Yeah.
But it's a really easy read, and I'm learning a ton from this book. I've already ordered a bunch of copies to gift to people.
Interesting. So this will be a good one next time. So
yeah, I feel like this has got to be the right thing at the right time for the right person, but it's right in my wheelhouse, and I'm loving it so far.
Cool. Following that, I have selected a recommendation from the club, Quiet by Susan Cain. Welcome to the world of introverts. This will be good.
Nice. I'm excited to read this one. By the way, Extreme Ownership was a recommendation too. I picked that one just because of the number of votes that it had gotten in the Bookworm Club. So thank you.
Yeah. We've been doing a lot of those lately.
Yep. All right, Gap Books. I've got one which was recommended by Shahid when we interviewed him. He mentioned that he liked digital minimalism, but the one book that presented the same sort of arguments that he really, really enjoyed was this book called Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky. And so I have this one in my hands right now, but I have not started this yet, and I'm excited to dig into this one.
Cool. I don't have a Gap book this time.
That's okay.
Life's been crazy.
We'll forgive you.
Thanks. Cool.
All right, so if you want to recommend a book like Extreme Ownership or Quiet by Susan Cain, you can do that over at the Bookworm Club, club.bookworm.fm. Just create an account and then go to the recommendations category, add a recommendation, and then also remember to vote for it, because we do look at the number of votes when deciding what books we're going to cover next.
And click the vote. Like when you make a recommendation, then turn around and hit the vote button. People keep forgetting to do that.
Exactly. And if you want to see a list of the books that are upcoming, you can do that on the website by going to bookworm.fm/list.
There's a few ways you can support the show. We've been expanding that particular piece. The fun one is leaving us a review and joining the club. Like those are great ways to get feedback to us to help us see, what it is you like about the show. So leave us a review. Tell us how we're doing. Join the club, club.bookworm.fm. Lots of cool conversations happening out there, and those continue to expand and grow. One of which being our action items we're now posting on the club and trying to talk through those as the in-between time occurs. But the one we would encourage you the most is supporting the show through a premium membership. And you can do that at bookworm.fm/membership, right, Mike? I got to remember what we put it at.
Yep.
Bookworm.fm/membership. If you go there, you can sign up and donate to the show month to month. We talked about all the benefits earlier in the show, but you can get all the details there at bookworm.fm/membership.
All right. So if you are reading along with us, pick up Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.